What's up everyone, it's Javi here, and in this video we're going to prototype and animate a Google search on Figma. If you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Javi and I'm publishing weekly videos about product design skills, principles, and practices to help you build digital products. This is the 7th and last video of my Figma series on the Google search. If Sergey and Larry would have come up with Google in 2021, they could have used a tool like Figma in order to illustrate their idea at a high enough fidelity that they could have showcased it to others, validate it with their customers, and maybe even raise some funds, and all without having had to write a single line of code. Prototyping and animation are great skills to have. They are easy enhancements you can apply to your design, and they're going to make your design look more like the real deal. Before we get straight into prototyping, a couple minor comments for those of you who have been following the series. There's a couple of enhancements I've made to the components for the prototyping stage, and I wanted to share those with you first. So I'm working here on this new file called Google Search Prototype. It's got all of the components and design tokens that we've been working on for the past month. And what I wanted to show you before we get into the prototype is the components, right? So I've added a variant here to our search result component that includes some properties that illustrate some extra information about a search result. I grouped what we had before into a single auto layout. And the reason I did that is because there is consistent 4-pixel spacing in between. So it made sense to have those grouped. And then between that huge block of information and the others, there is 8-pixel distance, right? So that's one auto layout section, and this is another auto layout section. And as I introduce that, you can see if you go to the component itself that there is now a new section here called properties, which we can toggle to true or false, right? So we will see that just in a second in action. And yeah, there's just a little bit more of a diversity of variants here. And the second modification I've made was to come over to what we had before as tweet card, and I changed it to card result. This essentially means that I've broadened the use case for this component to be more than just about tweets, but also just about any kind of search result that shows this sort of layout. And I did that because when I was searching over on Google for Elon Musk with a US language setting, I realized that in that particular use case, top stories are being shown like this with the card. And I found this to be quite interesting because it would help us explore using this component with a little bit more reusability. Basically the same component used across 2 different use cases. So I thought, okay, why not? Let's just upgrade the component we had into something broader. So there's type news and type tweet as a variant. And then you can toggle true or false for the image as we had before. So now that I've covered the components, let's actually head over to our start page. And all I did was bring these 2 into view, since these are screens that we already had from previous exercises in past videos. The first one here is our plain default screen with our Google homepage. And the next one that I wanted to showcase here is simply how we are going to prototype the change in the state of the search box as I hover over it. So that's the first animation that we're going to be making. The next part of the prototype is going to be one where the search box changes its state from hover to focus, right? So if I go back to my components here and we reference just what focus means, it's this particular one right here, right? So I would come over back to my start page. I'm going to duplicate this by doing Command-C, Command-V, and I'm just going to change this to focus. And I'm going to come over here to my search box component. And I'm just going to change the state from hover to focus. And as you can see, the buttons are overlaying here, which we don't want. And this is because our layer structure here is not entirely pixel perfect. You can see that the buttons here are standing on top. So all I have to do is either remove them because we already have them here, or I can just put them in the back. Same thing goes here for this text layer right here, right? So I'm just gonna move this all the way to the back. And the next thing we would do in order to get to our prototyping is to actually change the copy here. I've already defined the copy here in the prototype, so we don't have to delve too much into it in this video. So I'm just gonna copy it and I'm gonna paste it here. And there we go. So now we can just remove this one. And by the way, if you were to try to do this manually yourself, just a note, in terms of how that would go, just remember that we have the base text and the autocomplete as 2 separate text layers. So you would have to first, let's say, edit this one, Elon Musk, and then put here the autocomplete in bold, right? So you can do that for as many search entries as you want. So let's just remove that since we already have what we need. The next thing we want to do is to actually get to the results page, right? So if I were to click on this Google search button, I want to go to the Google search page with all the different entries of pages that I can go to from that search query. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy paste this. We actually don't need most of it. So I'm just going to select all of these and press delete. And we can come here to the prototype for reference to see what we have. The first component in the view is going to be a Google logo with a 32 pixel on the sides. So we already have a Google logo here. We can just copy paste this and we can come over here and paste it and just set a 32 pixel padding from the sides, from top and left. And there we have it. And now let's just come in here and change the height to 30. So there we go. Let's just make sure to change those constraints just for reference. And now we can start adding the rest of the elements. So we would have this component right here, which we already have from our components. So you can either copy it from here or from here as well. This is our search element with the variant of site results. So I could just copy that, or I'm just going to grab this one right here. And this is going to be a 32 difference with respect to the logo and 24 from the top. So we're keeping these aligned horizontally. And if we were to just follow along that line, I think at the very end, we have some user controls, right? So my user profile and the grid here. So we have those here, but we also have them in our homepage. So I could just come over here, copy paste these, which are already nicely organized in an auto layout. And I'm just going to move them over to the right side of the screen. And Figma gives me these nice alignment tools to make sure that everything is in place. So I'm just going to mimic the spacing on the left, which is 32 pixels, and follow that on the right. The next step is to create these tabs. So the great thing about it is that we already have a component for our tabs. And instead of going to the components page all the time to grab those components, again, what you can do is come over to your assets panel here, and you will see all the components that you have created in this particular file. So you can see here that one of them is going to be tab. So I'm just going to drag that over to my canvas. I'm going to set a 24 pixel distance with respect to the search box. And the alignment is going to be with respect to the text, right? So the text is 176 pixels away from the left side here of my frame. We want that to be the same case for the icon here, more or less. So we have 168 here. What I'm gonna do is just nudge it over, and now we should be at 178. Move it two more to the left. That should be good to go. Let's set a 24 pixel distance here with respect to these two layers. And now what I can do is I'm going to hold my Alt key to duplicate over. It can be right next to each other. And then with both selected, so I hold my Shift key now and I do Shift A to create that auto layout. And now we can just come here and see how many tabs we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to change this to active, right? Because we can only have one active tab at a time. And I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That should be it, right? So yeah. So we have images, news, and videos. So what we can do is, because the icon is a component itself, remember we have the variants here. So image is going to be this one. You can change it to images. And essentially you can do the same thing for all the tabs that we have here. Now we have to add a divider, right, for the whole header area. So I'm just going to press R and create this rectangle here with a 1 pixel height. And I'm going to drag it over to the left of the screen here. Perfect. I'm going to left and right for constraints, and I'm going to bring it up here until the very bottom of it is going to be just underneath the first pixel of my tabs. And then with that still selected, I'm going to come over to my fill and then just make sure that we're selecting our divider color token. So now that we have all our header elements, I can just come over here, select all of them, do Command-Alt-G to create a frame that has all of them at once. And I'm going to rename this to header. I'm going to give it a background fill of background. And I'm going to stretch this holding my command key so nothing moves while I resize all the way up here, right? So making sure that that's pixel perfect. And this background color fill is going to be helpful because later you will see that as we scroll the page, we want the content to sit behind it. So if we don't have a background fill for this particular frame, you're going to still be able to see the content underneath, and we don't want that. So we have the header. Now let's just do some layer management cleaning here. So I'm going to rename this to divider. And I think that's pretty much it. Everything else looks like it's pretty solid. Okay, so we have our header here. I'm going to, by the way, change this to Google search results. And now we can start populating the actual results page. So first things first, there's this tiny text layer here for which I'm using our tokens properly. I'm using the small regular label and the tertiary color to show search results. So that should be quite easy. I'm just going to copy paste that over. And it has a 16 pixel difference with respect to the header. Next, what we can do is come over here and copy paste this one right here. We worked on this particular element in a separate video. I'm going to put all the links to the previous videos in the description below if you want to check those out and grab the file from where we have that component. But if you want to just copy paste it from here, that's fine as well. So I'm just going to Command C to copy, and I'm going to come over to my start page, and I'm going to Command V for paste, and that should be good to go. And the next thing would be to start populating the actual search results. So for that, we're going to be using our search result component. And you can go ahead and work a little bit on the copy if you want, but I'm just going to take you through the copy that I've already created so we don't spend too much time focusing on adjusting the copy, which actually is a little bit time consuming. We are continuing to have our alignment here of 176. And here you can see an example of how I've been using this new properties that I've added, just in cases like this where we have a sort of a search result with meta properties that want to be reflected on the Google search, right? So in the case of Wikipedia page, we would have stuff like education, parents, and so on. And actually here there's a typo. This is not education. This is probably going to be something else. Years active. He's been active for a while. Okay, so we have our first search result here. Let's come over to prototype. And this section here is for the top stories. What I did here is first I created a title section here with an icon and the name of the section, which in this case is top stories. So we can start with that, right? So I'm gonna copy paste the whole thing, and I'm gonna paste it here on start and then walk you through it there. So you can see that it's got our section title here with the icon and the text. So this is our icon component. And the cards are contained within a frame called stories. And inside stories, you can see actually there is one page that contains these three components right here. So these are our card results components. And the only thing I did here was change the copy to make it a bit more realistic with the prototype. That's going to be page one. And we can talk about page two when we get into animation. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand this a little bit so we have a little bit more breathing room to add everything else we want to add. So other things that are relevant here, I created this little frame here called next. So I'm going to copy paste that over here. It's going to be aligned with respect to these cards. And essentially what this has is a frame that contains an icon that we didn't add before. So I just went over to Remix Icon Library and I just grabbed it, copy pasted the SVG, and we have it right here. And as a final touch here, I also added a little drop shadow effect to make it pop out of the screen a little bit more and become a bit more noticeable, just like on the actual Google search. Right below top stories, we're gonna have our component here for Twitter result. So we already have this ready to go. So I'm just gonna copy paste that into our search results. And essentially what you see here is that exact component that we created. It includes a search result component that has all of the properties disabled. And then below it is going to be an auto layout of cards as we reviewed in previous videos. And it's going to include that card result component that in all cases is turned over to tweet. The only difference is that this one is going to have an image and these ones are not, right? So if I were to change this to image, you could see the result there, but it is still a tweet type card result. So I'm just going to leave that there as it is. This is going to be quite an easy one to create since we already have that whole component ready. Right below it, we're just going to add some more search results. So all you have to do here in order to prototype it effectively is just use that search result component and then just play around with the properties to get the kind of result that you want. Now, in terms of this one, as you can see, there's only one property. So the way I did that is I grabbed the search result component that has the properties visible. And what I did is I literally went into the auto layout, and because this is dynamic, all I did was remove row 2. So that's step number 1. And step number 2, I could actually just remove one of the properties here. And now we have a search result with just one property that actually even extends all the way to the end of the row, just based on how we configured the auto layout here. And that led us to this. So here's one. Here's another search result where the description is still on, but the other two toggles are going to be disabled. Right below these two search results is going to be a video section. So if you actually look at the one on Google, it has a divider, but I didn't want to get too much into the details at this stage since all we're doing is doing a little bit of prototyping and animation. So what I did is the same as in the section before. I created a section title with an icon and the name. Actually, this icon is not the right one. We should be changing this to movie, right, for videos. And right below it, you can see that I have a auto layout frame. I can call this videos. And in this case, we have 3 media result components where the media position is set to left, right? So we already created this component in the past. And now because we have it, it's just so easy to just be able to copy paste it and add it to our prototype. So I'm gonna continue to add a little bit more space here. The spacing between the search results, by the way, is gonna be 32 pixels all over. So just being extra consistent with how we're defining that, and the alignment is still continuing to be 176. And what would follow is a Google logo that I just wanted to prototype here to show a little bit of the pagination of how you can go between different pages of search results. Didn't actually get to prototype that, but I thought it was a fun exercise. What I did is I came over here and I copy pasted the Google logo. And because this logo is a vector, what you can do is you can expand this. Make sure you're holding your command key while you're doing so. And you can start giving these a little bit of space and actually start creating some more O's. So I created the first O. I put it at a reasonable distance, maybe something like that. And I created them as an auto layout so I could then easily just continue to add some more O's in that x-axis, right? So that's how I did that. And then right below it, I just added a couple numbers. I added the icon that we imported earlier as well here, and I added a text layer. I put it all together, and it's this little frame here called pagination. And the last component here is going to be a footer. I reused what we already had for our homepage since it's the same styles. So if you were to go over to your homepage, I reused row 2, and essentially all you have to do is remove the links from the right and add an extra link from the left, which was super easy because these are already in auto layout. So as you copy paste, it will just naturally fall into place. So as you can see, everything we've been doing for the past few videos is actually helping us prototype a lot faster. And in just a couple of minutes, as you can see, we are able to get a whole search results page that would otherwise take you a couple of hours. Okay, so now that we have all the views, we can actually start prototyping this. What I did next is actually, I did not want to have this full view as part of the prototype. This was more of a way for me to see it all in one view. But what I did is I then copy pasted that entire frame and I reduced the height to my normal screen size of 900, just so that the starting point of that search results page would be constrained by that height. And the next thing I want to animate here is to actually show how you can move these articles over to the left after I click on this arrow. And then basically we have a little bit of a carousel that then shows you 3 more articles that are going to be coming from the right. So the way you can do that is by copy pasting this over to another frame. And when you're designing animation in Figma, what's really helpful as a mental model is you want to have the before and after, because what we're going to be using in Figma is this function called Smart Animate, which makes animation super easy. And I created a little example here just to illustrate you what's going on in the background and how it works. I'm going to close this prototype and click here on the play button to present the existing prototype. And as you can see, I set it up so that when I click, this square turns into a rectangle, and the text layer also, you can see there's a subtle animation here that takes this text up and the other text comes down, and vice versa. So what is happening in the background is, if I go over here to my prototype tab, this is where you can set up all your prototyping properties. And this icon right here denotes you the beginning of your prototype. So if you were to, for example, drag this over here and you were to try to prototype again, you can see that the first frame here is rectangle, and you can go back and forth from there. And then, as I mentioned, this is essentially the before and after, right? So what I want to do is I want to grab that square and I want to turn it into a rectangle. So this is the first view here, and this is the second. And what's really important to show is that on both screens, we have all the layers that we need. So even the ones you don't see, like for example, the rectangle text, it's actually hidden in here. And if you're noticing that these automatically just changed, it's because I had to pause the video because I wrote them the other way around. So that's just a tiny note if you noticed that. But you can see that even the rectangle text that I'm not showing on this view, that I am then showing in this one, is going to be hidden from view, but still present in the frame. And we're doing this because the way Smart Animate works is by taking that before and after state and just transitioning between the two, right? So as you can see, this is a layer that has 0% opacity and is placed a little bit lower than the center of the frame. And in this case, now it has 80% opacity, so as much as we wanted it to have, and it's going to be centered. And in the case of the square text, here it's centered and visible at 80% opacity. And here you can see in screen 2 that it has now 0% opacity and it's a little bit higher up. So as you can see, if you notice, oops, not there. If you notice, and I come over here, you can see that just by looking at that animation of how the text moves up and down, you get an idea of what actually is going on behind the scenes. So that's the way Smart Animate works. One important thing to keep in mind in order to make Smart Animate work is that the layers need to have the same names. Otherwise, it's not going to work properly. For example, if I were to come over here and change this layer here to rectangle, and I were to try to animate it, it's not going to actually detect that I'm referring to the same layer across the two views, right? So if you want to animate anything between two frames, make sure that the layers that you are referencing are going to have the same name. That's why, especially if you're looking to animate something on Figma, it's very important that from the beginning you are being thorough about the way you do your layer structure. Okay, so now that we've seen a little bit of how Smart Animate works, we can come back over to our prototype, and now we can make a better sense of how this page 2 actually works. So as you remember, we were doing this one, there is stories, and stories has page 1, which contains these 3 cards, and there's page 2, which contains 3 other card results. And what I did is set this whole frame to 0%. So that's going to be entirely hidden. Plus the fact that this frame itself, stories, I toggled the little checkbox here called clip content, meaning that anything that is outside of that frame is not going to show, right? So even if I moved page 1 over to the left, you can see that there's a limit to how much is being shown. And this is going to be helpful for us because as we move page 2 over, we don't want page 1 to actually move beyond the alignment that we had from the left, right? So that's a requirement for us to do this properly. And so if you look at page 2 here, you can see that the stories now has page 2 in view, and page 1 is taken all the way to the left with a 0% opacity. And this is so that when we are pulling things to the left and they are being taken away from the frame, at the same time we are also making this very nice and smooth animation that essentially is going to dissolve the cards as they come out of view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to move page 1 away. So I'm just going to nudge these out. And what's important is that the end of the last card is going to be aligned with the edge of the frame here. And I'm just going to put page 2 into view by coming here to my alignment, and I'm just going to align left. And I can just come over here and change the opacity to 100, and I can come to my page 1, and I can change this to opacity 0, and that's all we have to do. The last detail is to change this over to the left. And the way I did that is to actually change the name from next to next right. And so this is actually going to be the one that we're going to keep over here. And what we want is we want this one to disappear as we move to our page 2. So I'm going to set this to opacity 0. And I can copy paste it. I can nudge this one over to the left, and I'm going to align it vertically with respect to the frame here. And I'm going to bring back the opacity so we can see it. And I'm just going to hold my shift key and come over here to the corner so I can easily rotate, and just start rotating like that until I have my next left. So this next left is going to be visible in this view, but in this one it's going to remain hidden. So as you can see, we're just going between back and forth, again, seeing the before and after. So I can set this to 0%. And now that should be as far as what we want to animate for this particular section. The last piece that we're going to do for this animation is going to be to scroll. Figma does not currently support scrolling as a way to do interaction on a prototype. So what we're going to do is to still be able to mimic how the user would scroll, but instead of scrolling, we're just going to have a click interaction instead. So it's just going to be another way for us to get to the same result. If we go over to google.com and we see how that works, you can see that as you scroll, there's going to be a change of header style, right? So you go from that to this, and it literally changes entirely. So what I did, if you look at prototype right here, I created another style, just reusing what we already have, and I called it top navigation short. So if I bring that over, let's make sure that we have another view here. I'm going to call this search results page 2. As a reference to our section, we can call this page 1. And then we can call this frame scrolling down. And all you have to do here is come over to your header, and we're going to change this to top navigation. So when we are smart animating this, it's going to know which one we're referencing. And the first thing to do is to get this one out of view, right? So before we do that, actually, let's make sure that navigation is going to sit at the very top of your layer structure for this particular frame. Because as you scroll, you don't want any of the information to overlap from the top. You want the header to sit at the very top of the parent frame. And I'm going to come here and make sure that it's also the same case. So we could have done this earlier as we were defining this frame, but it's okay. I'm just going to Control X for cutting, and I can just paste it again and it will just sit on top. Let's just make sure we bring it over to our parent here. So I'm just going to gently drag this over to the top of our frame, making sure it doesn't get nested anywhere that we don't want it to. And that should be good enough. And the second thing to do here is to create the shorter style. So I'm just gonna grab what I already have because this should be fairly intuitive, right? This is just gonna be the exact same header, except that the short version does not have any tabs. So we can remove those from view. It's a little bit shorter with respect to the spacing. If you notice here, there is a 12 pixel from top and bottom, and it has a divider that's placed right below it. So I'm just gonna take this one, and as we did before, I'm going to bring it all the way to the top here until it sits at the very edge of the frame. And I think that the way it's gonna work is that you want this to be still be overlaying on top of the shorter style. So we want this layer to actually still be on top. And this is still gonna be right below it. So the way it'll work is this one will be disappearing from view, and we're gonna set an opacity. We're gonna keep it at 100 since we don't wanna have any sort of fade in this case. And we're gonna keep this short one here. And now we just have to think backwards. Come over here to our previous frame, bring it here, and then do the exact same thing on top and make sure it sits below the main one. So that should be everything we have to do for the header. Now what's remaining is to grab all of our results and bring them down. I'm just gonna select all of these holding my command key so I don't select the entire frame. And I'm positioning myself here so that now I have everything selected. And what we can do is just hold my shift key for nudging and pressing this all the way up. I'm gonna change my height back to 900. And that should do it. I'm gonna reselect the ones that are in view. And I'm going to just bring them over right here. So they sit nicely with respect to that edge. And that is it for structuring the content. Now, all that's remaining is to prototype the animation. So we can come over here to our first frame. And the first thing we want to do is set that hover. So let's go to our prototyping screen here on the side. And what you'll do is you'll select, in this case, the search box. And because you want to have some form of hover effect, what you will do is you will grab it from here, from the plus symbol right here, and just drag it over to the next screen that you want to showcase. And the interaction details panel is going to be divided into two sections. What's going to be your trigger and what's going to be the result, right? So for every animation, you have a trigger that causes it and then a result in effect of that trigger. In this case, the trigger is going to be while hovering. So as I'm hovering over that component, we're going to navigate to this page, and we're going to be using Smart Animate with a timing of 200 milliseconds, and we can just leave the easing. These are just tweaks with respect to the particular timing of the curving of your animation. So we don't have to go into detail about that. All we want to focus on is the hovering. So if I were to actually prototype as far as we've come so far right now, you will be able to see that as I hover over the component, it's changing to the next screen. And as I hover out, it's going back to the first frame. So we figured that part out. The next step is to get from here to here. So again, you will select this one. You will link it to the next screen. And then in this case, we're going to click, right? Because there's no native way on Figma to actually insert text. So I'm going to be clicking, and instead of Smart Animate, we're going to go with an instant animation. So it's going to mimic exactly the way Google works when you are searching. So that's going to be shown straight away after I click. And then the next thing to link is going to be grabbing this Google search button. So we're going to be clicking on it, and it's going to take us over to this screen of the search results. And this is going to be same animation as the one before. We're going to be doing an on click, and it's going to be instant. So now that we are in search results, the animation we want to do next is going to be going from page 1 to page 2 of our top stories. And the way we can do that is selecting our next button right here, next right, and dragging it over to the next screen. We're going to keep the on click, and the animation, instead of instant, we're going to smart animate. And just so we can see it a bit more, maybe I can exaggerate this a little bit so you can see at once what's going on. So let's set it to 1000 milliseconds, which is a second. And we can come back over here to our prototype so far to see how it looks. So I'm just going to come back to the first frame. So the hover, as we tested earlier, works well. I'm going to click on it. Now I get the auto suggestions. I'm going to come over here to the Google search button to perform a search. And as you can see, the pointer is already giving me an affordance that this button is indeed clickable. So I'm going to click on it. So now I'm in the Google search results page. And if I were to hover over this, we're going to have the pointer again. And as you can see, there we go. I can use my left arrow key to go back to the previous frame just to show it to you one more time. And it might be a little bit laggy on the video because I am doing this prototyping at the same time as I'm recording my screen. But I think for you, it's going to look a lot more smooth if you try it out yourself. But just so you get the idea, page 1 is dissolving into the left and we cannot see them anymore because we have that clip content. And page 2 is coming from 0% opacity over from the right. And so we have this intended behavior of the pagination. And at the same time, we are also introducing that new component from the left. So if we come back over to our prototype, the last thing we can do, actually make this a little bit more speedy. So let's do 200 milliseconds. We can facilitate a sort of back and forth if we want to. So I could just select this and make sure that our interaction goes back to the previous screen. On click Smart Animate 200. So if we do that now, you can see that there's a nice back and forth between the two, and it's a little bit faster now that we've set up that reduction in milliseconds. So we got that. Next, for scrolling, let's just say that if you were to click anywhere on the screen other than on the arrows to move between pages, you're going to have a scroll effect. So the way to do that is select the entire frame, and then you will see that the handle to create that animation is going to be on the far right center of that frame. So we can just see it right here. And I'm just going to drag it over to my screen here. And it's going to be a on-click Smart Animate. Maybe in this case, since we're scrolling, we can keep it to 500 milliseconds. And so that should give us a smooth scrolling effect, right? So if we come over here to our prototype, we can only do it from the screen where we have our page 2. So let's do it here. I'm going to click, and there we go. Actually, let's set a go back animation by having that click also happen on this screen right here. So I'm going to drag over from the frame and say on click Smart Animate 500. So as you can see now, if I click once and click twice, you can see that two things are happening which we've defined before. The first is that the content of the page is moving upwards as we scroll, right? So that's the first thing we want to do. And the second is the nice change of the headers from the full style to the short style. And they are nicely overlapping one on the other thanks to the way that we've organized the layers earlier. And I guess that's a wrap for the Figma series. If you've been following this series, thank you so much. I really appreciate it as my first series on YouTube. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please drop them in the comments down below. Let me know how you liked it. If you would like to get on a personal call with me, I've added a link in the description for you to make it happen. I would love to hear any personal feedback that you may have about these videos, or if you simply want to talk about design or something that you're doing, that you're working on, and that you're wanting to learn this year. I would love to know in case there's any way that I can help or make the contents of this YouTube channel a bit more relevant to you. And that is it for today. Stay safe, and I will catch you in the next one.